Stories have the ability to create new worlds, take us on extraordinary journeys, and invoke a wide range of emotions. Stories can be written by anyone, from seasoned authors writing the next great American novel to high school students writing their very first Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Video games open up an entirely new method of storytelling because the player is not just watching the story unfold around them, but they're experiencing it as a character within the story. Video games can do all kinds of things to combine story and gameplay. Some games, like Telltale's The Walking Dead, are visual novels where you watch the story like a television show and the gameplay centers around the player making choices that affects the story. Other games, like Five Nights at Freddy's, put more focus on gameplay with the story being hidden for players to discover themselves. But no matter how developers combine story and gameplay, there's one thing that they all have in common, and that's that the stories that they tell must eventually come to an end. A story's ending is extremely important because it's the last thing we're left with at the end of our journey. The ending has the ability to make or break the entire story because if done correctly, it could leave a lasting impression that players will never forget. However, if a writer is unable to wrap up everything in a satisfactory way, it could leave the player feeling like they wasted their time or like the entire endeavor was pointless. I'm sure everyone has at least one game that has stuck with them for years for having such a great story. For me, it's BioShock Infinite. Developed by Irrational Games and released in 2013, BioShock Infinite follows the story of Booker DeWitt, a down-on-his-luck private investigator who's severely in debt and needs to take on a dangerous job to find the girl and wipe away the debt. Booker's journey takes us to the city of Columbia, a city floating in the sky and is run by their religious leader Zachary Comstock. The people of Columbia believe that Elizabeth, the girl that Booker is sent to find, is destined to rule Columbia and lead them to a promised future of prosperity. The story really picks up at the end of Act 1. After we've rescued Elizabeth and we're trying to escape Columbia, we get to see Booker and Elizabeth working together to overcome obstacles like fighting one of Booker's old colleagues in a revolution of the working class. During these challenges, we get to learn more about the two as they slowly develop a bond together. We also learn about Elizabeth's secret power to pull objects from other timelines and bring them into her own reality. Move over, Doctor Strange, and watch a real pro alter the multiverse. This power starts off simple enough, with Elizabeth being able to bring back weapons and health packs into our world, but soon she's able to take us into entirely new timelines where major story events never happened in the first place. This builds in the grand finale of the game, where we find out the truth about Elizabeth. See, Elizabeth wasn't the only one who discovered the ability to travel between universes. Throughout the game, we are visited by the Lutece twins, a brother and a sister who are slowly guiding us on our journey. We learn that Elizabeth isn't actually Comstock's biological daughter, but is actually Booker's daughter that he gave up to pay off his debts a long time ago. Not only that, but we also learn who Comstock really is. See, when Booker was younger, we learned that he was a soldier who fought at the Battle of Wounded Knee, and the experience left him with a lot of PTSD. Trying to find forgiveness, he decided to turn to religion. However, during the baptism, Booker decided at the last minute that he can't go through with it and he runs away. Except, he doesn't run away in every timeline. In another world, he goes through with the baptism, and is reborn as a new man, as Zachary Comstock. Booker and Comstock are the same person who have walked two different paths, and Comstock hired the Luteces to take Booker's daughter from his universe to be his daughter in his universe. So, the only way to truly defeat Comstock and free all the Elizabeths is to eliminate all the Booker DeWitts so that there's no chance that they can become Comstock. It's such a powerful reveal as we see Booker accept his fate and allow the other Elizabeths to drown him in the river so they can finally be set free. Even 10 years later, I still remember that ending because of how well it was written. The developers could have easily copied the story of BioShock and put it in the sky, but instead they took the time to write a unique and amazing story. It's something that really helps the game stand out, and it's why it has such a lasting impression. It just shows how important it is for games to have such a good ending, because if done correctly, it can really leave an impact on players that'll stick with them for years. It's also why I've been so disappointed in modern games, because not only is there a huge decline in story quality, a lot of newer games don't even write a real story for their games. But wait, how could a game not have a story? It's not like they just drop you in a room full of enemies and tell you to start fighting for no other reason other than because you're playing a video game, right? Well, that's not too far off actually. It's time we take a look at live service games. Live service games, or games as a service, are essentially video games that developers are constantly adding new content to over an extended period of time for players to keep coming back to play. On paper, this seems like a great idea. I mean, my favorite games will always be getting new content. Why would that be such a bad thing? Well, in practice, it's an entirely different story. Most live service games are built to have a very simple gameplay loop that's easy for anyone to pick up and start playing, but highly addictive for certain players. You'll be fighting against the same dozen or so enemies with different buffs and stat boosts in the same handful of maps endlessly, usually to grind for gear or currencies so you can fight the next group of enemies with slightly higher health in an endless cycle of grinding and leveling. But hang on, how is that different from any other game? It's normal for games to have harder enemies later in the game so things don't get too easy for the player. Well, my friend, the difference is in execution. See, in traditional games, the goal is to beat the game by either finishing the story or 100%ing it, but live service games have no ending. Developers will build them to never have a real ending, but instead, prepare the player for the grind at the end of the game. They almost always make the promise that one day you'll be able to defeat all the enemies and finish the story, but then drip feed content over the span of several years so players have to keep coming back for more. After all, if a game is over, then what reason do players have to keep coming back to check out the newest round of skins in the premium shop or buy the newest expansion pack? Okay, so these games are designed to never have an ending, but what about the story up until that point? Surely there has to be some explanation to why we're here in the first place. And you are correct, there usually is a story explanation to why we're here in the first place. Kind of. See, game developers know that they can't just expect players to pick up the game and start grinding. They need a way to teach players how to play their game and get them hooked on the gameplay loop. So, they utilize what I call a tutorial story. In a tutorial story, you aren't trying to take the player on a journey, but rather, you're trying to train them on how the mechanics and missions of your game work so they'll be prepared to join in on the grind when it inevitably happens. You shower them with easy missions and a ton of loot early on so they get hooked on the gameplay loop, then gradually ramp up the difficulty till you can remove the training wheels and let them grind on their own. Sure, there's cutscenes and dialogue between missions, but that's just to set up the reason you're expected to grind in the first place. Let's look at an example of this with a game that came out this year, Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. The game starts out with Metropolis being invaded by Brainiac, a powerful alien who's taken over the city and brainwashed the Justice League to fight on his side. So it's up to the Suicide Squad, a collection of villains from Arkham Asylum, to defeat his army of aliens, kill the Justice League, and save the Earth. Sounds simple enough. But after a short tutorial in the opening cutscene, the story is basically non-existent. We're given about 2 or 3 missions until we unlock the next object needed to kill the next member of the Justice League, then we have a boss fight, then we're given another 2 or 3 missions to complete for the next item, rinse and repeat until you've killed all the members of the Justice League. The missions we do between bosses are the same ones we're expected to do in the grind, and the explanation why we're doing it in the first place amounts to because you were told to do it. The story is only here to teach the player how to complete the missions. This is most apparent during the final boss, where after you kill him, you're met with the message, oh, by the way, there's 12 more of the same boss, and the devs will be releasing another one to fight every few months or so come back every now and then to do so. To make matters worse, the final boss is an exact copy of one of the Justice League members, complete with the exact same powers and the exact same method to defeat him, essentially making him a palette swap of the boss we fought earlier. This is supposed to be a boss that's so powerful he was able to defeat the entire Justice League, but we can't even get a unique boss fight against him? It makes the entire story feel pointless because we killed the entire Justice League in Brainiac only to be told there's 12 more to fight. The Earth isn't in any less danger after our entire journey because we need an excuse to come back and fight the next boss in a few months. And all those missions we completed are now ones we're expected to grind for gear, making them feel pointless because they're meant to be done endlessly without a real goal outside of getting new equipment. But somehow things get even worse. After you defeat the first Brainiac, the game completely gives up on telling any kind of a story. The second Brainiac fight was released in the Season 1 expansion almost a month later, and the game doesn't even bother telling us a story. We're dropped in a new map, told to grind missions until we hit a certain number, and then we just do the boss fight. No new missions, no new bits of story, just grind until we say so. It's why so many players drop the game after the first few days. If the only reason to grind missions is to get new gear, to grind more missions, then what's the point of grinding in the first place if I'm not working towards any real goal? And this issue isn't exclusive to Suicide Squad. Most live service games follow a similar model of using the story to train players to complete the missions that they'll be expected to keep playing to make the imaginary numbers keep going up. These games are essentially slot machines where players keep doing the same actions over and over again, hoping to get bigger numbers. Even if players want to know how the story ends for any of these live service games, there's a good chance they never exist in the first place. Developers will keep adding reasons to keep grinding and keep coming back until the player base has become so low that the publisher pulls the plug on it, never to be played again by anyone else. It's sad because the studios making them are extremely talented and have made amazing games in the past, but now they've been reduced to a skeleton crew of maintenance workers, expected to keep the grind machine turning until it finally breaks, only to be expected to make a new one and start the process all over again. While this might seem like a bleak outcome fueled by greed, the story does have a happy ending. In the last couple years, we've seen major pushback from gamers against live service games. Players are abandoning them after a few days and not returning, choosing to play other more story and gameplay focused games. And no players means no one to buy all those fancy cosmetics and no one to grind all those battle passes that are coming out every month. Players are actually able to fight back against these half-baked live service games by attacking the greedy companies where it hurts most, their wallets. While some companies might be doubling down on live service games, several others have recognized that it's a dying model and have moved towards innovating new ideas. Indie games and small studios have been doing really well recently because they've been focusing on making real games that players will enjoy rather than trying to capitalize on a dying trend. While things might seem bleak for the gaming industry now, I don't think we're anywhere near the end of this story, but rather the end of the live service chapter. And I for one can't wait to see what the next chapter of gaming has in store. But what do you guys think? Is the gaming industry barreling towards disaster, or are we finally heading in a better direction? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. See ya!